Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I welcome you one and all for this today's lecture, that is Epidemiological Methods, Descriptive Epidemiology-II. In the last class, if you recall, I discussed with you about the various types of epidemiological studies or patterns or designs, under which I also discussed about what are observational studies and what are experimental studies or intervention studies. In observational studies, again, they are divided into descriptive and analytical. Analytical are again divided into case control study, cohort study, cross-sectional study, and ecological or correlational studies. Under experimental or intervention studies, they are again divided into randomized trials, clinical studies, and field trials. And community trials. So all these are the different epidemiological methods which we have discussed. And I also discussed about the various steps of descriptive epidemiology. So the various steps of descriptive epidemiology, if you remember, to start with, it is defining the population to be studied, defining the disease to be studied, describing the disease by time, place, and person, measurement of disease, comparison with known indices, and formulation of an etiological hypothesis. So I've discussed with you regarding the first step, the second step, and a part of the third step, that is describing the disease by time, place, and person. So I've discussed with you about the time trends last time regarding what are the various time trends. Time trends are short-term fluctuations, periodic fluctuations, long-term secular trends, and short-term fluctuations are again common source, propagated, and slow or modern epidemics. So these are the various descriptions about the time trends or the time distribution of the disease. Today we will be discussing again exhaustively about the other steps of descriptive epidemiology and also about place and person distribution of the disease. That is the third step of descriptive epidemiology. So if you talk about the place distribution, this place distribution is also called geographical comparison or geographical pathology. Studies of the geography of disease or geographical pathology has been an important dimension of descriptive epidemiology. By studying the distribution of disease in different populations, we tend to gain perspective for the fascinating differences in disease patterns, not only between countries, but also between countries. This helps in understanding about the role of genetic factors, environmental factors in the causation of disease, as well as the diet factors and also etiological factors, dietary factors and etiological factors. Now, this geographical patterns or geographical distribution of disease or pathology provides an important source of clues about the disease. These variations or patterns can be classified as international variations, national variations, rural-urban differences, and local distributions. Now, international variations. Descriptive studies have shown the pattern of international variations, and it means that the pattern of disease is not the same everywhere in every place. For example, if you see that in a case of cancer, it exists throughout the world, but the incidence of cancer varies in different parts of the world. So the common thing is, example about this is, carcinoma of stomach is very common in Japan, but very uncommon in US. Carcinoma of colon is very uncommon in Japan, but very common in the US. Likewise, cancers of the oral cavity, uterine cervix are very common in India as compared to other Western and industrialized countries. Now, if you look into the international study of breast cancer, it showed that it has the lowest prevalence in Japan and the highest in Western countries. The other example is the cardiovascular disease. There is a marked international difference in the occurrence of cardiovascular diseases. So in Western countries, the cardiovascular diseases are more compared to that of Eastern countries. Likewise, the occurrence of diabetes is also more recently seen in Southeast Asia compared to other countries. Southeast Asia is known as the diabetes capital of the world. These variations have stimulated epidemiologists to search for cause-effect relationships between the environmental factors and the disease. The aim is to identify factors which are crucial in the cause and prevention of disease. Now, what are the national variations or differences or patterns in the distribution of disease? As we understand, the variation in disease occurrence can also occur within countries or national boundaries. The distribution, for example, the distribution of the following diseases have shown variations in distribution in India, with some parts of the country more affected and some parts less affected or not affected at all. Endemic goiter. In sub-Himalayan region, endemic goiter is more common than compared to other parts of the country. Lathyrism, likewise, is very common in certain parts of the country compared to others. Fluorosis is also common in certain parts of the country. For example, in Andhra, we have Nalagonda and Prakasham districts, which are endemic for fluorosis. Leprosy, likewise, leprosy is mostly of a rural disease compared to that of an urban areas. And malaria is confined primarily to the coastal regions. And nutritional deficiency diseases are common where there are pockets of poverty and where there are pockets of illiteracy or any other cause related to nutritional deficiency diseases. So one of the functions of descriptive epidemiology is to provide data regarding the type of disease problems, and these disease problems have to be expressed in terms of indicators of morbidity like incidence and prevalence, and indicators of mortality like mortality rates. This is why necessary in order to demarcate the areas, affected areas and the normal areas, so that appropriate healthcare services can be extended to the affected area and provide succor to the population there. Now, what are the rural and urban variations? Just like there are international variations and national variations, there can be also variations in the variations of patterns of disease occurrence in between the rural and the urban areas. In urban areas, we find chronic bronchitis, accidents, lung cancer, cardiovascular disease, mental illness, and drug dependence. These are quite typical of urban areas. Likewise, in rural areas, we find more of skin disease. Probably this has to do with more with personal hygiene and also the environment. Zoonotic diseases because of the presence of lot of animals which are a part of animal husbandry, or which are a part of milch animals which are meant for giving milk or being kept as pets in very rural areas. Soil transmitted helminths, whether it is roundworm or hookworm, which may be very common because of the lack of awareness or awareness to use footwear. Likewise, infant mortality and maternal mortality are more predominant, are more prevalent in rural areas compared to urban areas, either because of ignorance or illiteracy, or because of the age factor of the mothers, or because of the lack of utilization of the health services, or it can be also due to the absence of health services present in that area. So these rural-urban variations may be due to differences in population density. So some areas of the urban areas or rural areas can have differences in the presence of the population. Social class. Some diseases are more prevalent in higher social class. Some diseases are more prevalent in lower social class. Likewise, the deficiency in medical care in the form of drugs, in the form of logistics, in the form of human resources, whether it can be a doctor or whether it can be a nurse or healthcare personnel, levels of sanitation, like lack of safe water supply, as in a case of sanitary wells, sanitary ponds or tanks, whatever is it. And when the levels of sanitation are also poor among the rural public, education plays a lot as far as the differences of occurrence of disease in urban areas and rural areas are concerned. Usually in villages, we find people to be illiterate and ignorant compared to that of the urban counterparts. Environmental factors are also responsible to a certain extent as far as the causation of disease in urban and rural areas are concerned. The epidemiologists seeks to define high-risk groups for diseases. So in this process, in urban and rural areas, the epidemiologist tries to isolate the people who are at the risk of getting the diseases, and he provides guidelines to the health administrator so as to apply all the preventive measures and control measures among the high-risk group to prevent or thwart the diseases. Local distributions. Just like international, national, and rural urban variations, there can be local distribution of the disease. Inner and outer city variations in disease frequency are well known, and these are best studied with the aid of spot maps or shaded maps, which we must already have discussed in statistics, or we are going to discuss in statistics. So these maps show at glance areas of high or low frequency, the boundaries and the patterns of disease distribution. If a spot map or a shaded map shows a large number of cases or clustering of cases, it suggests a common source of infection or a common factor shared by all the cases. The examples is John Snow of England, in his classic investigation of cholera epidemic in 1854 in the Golden Square district of London, found that a pump is responsible for the causation, and this pump is located in Broad Street in London. So in the Golden Square district of London. So the pump which is responsible for the spread of the infection, that is cholera, has been isolated by John Snow, and he said that the water from this polluted pump or contaminated pump is responsible for the causation of cholera even before the discovery of Vibrio cholerae to be the causative organism of cholera. Maxey, in his place of employment, has hypothesized and said that a rodent reservoir is responsible for the causation of typhus in 1920, which further led to the discovery that typhus fever was not a single disease entirely. Likewise, evidence of case clustering based on sexual contact or blood products used can provide the clue that AIDS was an infectious disease. So the very infectiousness of AIDS leads to clustering of cases in and around a particular source, which further proves the fact that AIDS is an infectious disease. Classic examples of place-related diseases include yellow fever. If you see, yellow fever is most prevalent in Africa, where you have the yellow fever virus, as well as the Aedes mosquito and the environment responsible for the causation of yellow fever. Like schistosomiasis, again, which is very common in Egypt, sleeping sickness by the riverbeds of River Nile, and the endemic goiter seen in our own country in the sub-Himalayan region. Likewise, studies on asthma, cancer, cardiovascular disease, blood groups, and blood hemoglobins and abnormal hemoglobins are by geographic location are there. So we find in hilly regions, we find certain hemoglobin patterns, likewise certain blood groups. Likewise, the certain cancers are more in certain areas depending upon the source of the element that is responsible or the cause responsible for the diseases. In short, all diseases, whether acute or chronic, communicable or non-communicable, show patterns of geographical distribution or geographical pathology. This geographical distribution may provide evidence of the source of disease and its mode of spread. So this is often used by the epidemiologists to formulate and test etiological hypothesis. What is a hypothesis? As hypothesis is an assumption to show the relation between the cause and disease. So it is nothing but a statement which shows a relation between a cause and a disease, and this is often an assumption. This has to be further proved. That's why it is called as a hypothesis. The clinician is also benefited from the knowledge that a patient coming from a certain endemic area for certain infrequent diseases like yaws and leishmaniasis helps him to focus on the diseases to which the patient has been exposed. So in a way, the epidemiologists and the clinicians are benefited by the geographical distribution of disease, which helps them to understand or make diagnosis of the disease faster when they know that the patient is coming from an endemic area, and he or she may be likely to have the disease in question. This is a picture of John Snow. He studied the epidemiology of cholera in London and established the role of polluted drinking water in the spread of cholera. Now, this is the spot map of Asiatic cholera in London. This has been adapted from the map portrayed by John Snow. So this is about London, what we have. And this shows the Golden Square district of London. This is the Golden Square district of London. This entire is Golden Square district of London. So this is the Broad Street, and this is the pump, water pump. This is the polluted water pump that is responsible for the spread of cholera among the people living in the area. And you find the number of dots is nothing but the clustering of cases in and around the water pump. So large number of cases of cholera have occurred in and around the pump, which shows that the use of water from the contaminated or the polluted water pump. The water pump is still preserved in the broad street, so that people can, the tourists can come and have a look about this, have a look at the pump, which serves as a monument and which reminds us how John Snow could discover cholera being caused by contaminated water. Now, migration studies. Large-scale migrations of human populations from one country to another provide a unique opportunity to evaluate the role of genetic factors in the occurrence of disease in the population. So, suppose suppose a disease is there, and its prevalence in one place is different from that of the another. So, suppose in place A, if the prevalence of disease is more than in the prevalence of disease in area B, then we need to understand that there is some difference as far as the environment is concerned. So environment is also responsible for the causation of disease in both these places. So if B has has more prevalence of disease compared to that of A, and it means that the environment is in that B is responsible for more of the causation of disease. So so it is necessary that we need to understand about the role of migration, about as far as the causation of diseases are concerned, since human populations cannot be transferred from one place to another to see the causation of disease in particular areas. So migrant disease can be carried out in two ways. Number one is comparison of disease and death rates for migrants with those of the kins who stayed at home. It has been seen that the disease and death rates for migrants is often different from the disease and death rate for population of the host areas, or the population of the host countries. This is because of the environmental factors. If the disease and death rates of the migrants is similar to that of the country to which they have migrated, it means the environmental factors which has affected these migrants is one and the same. Comparison of migrants with local population of the host country provides information on genetically different groups living in a similar environment. If you compare the disease and death rates of migrants with that of the local population, suppose if the disease and death rates of the migrants with the local population are one and the same, it means that the genetic factors compared to that of the host country in which they are living must be similar, which says that the causation of disease in both these migrants as well as the local population is one and the same. So it has been observed that if you look into the causation of coronary heart disease in Japanese, it is found that the coronary heart disease in Japanese is low compared to that of US. Is that of the Japanese residing in US. So it means that the Japanese have taken to the taken to the new environment in US. Likewise, it has been seen that the third generation descendants of Japanese who are staying in America have more incidence of colon cancer and less incidence of stomach cancer compared to the original Japanese in the Japan, where stomach cancer is more and colon cancer is less. So what I mean to say is the Japanese who have long back migrated to US have the similar features what the local population suffer, or similar diseases or similar prevalence of disease as the local population suffer. The local population in the US have more of colon cancer and less of stomach cancer. So the Japanese who have stayed back in US have similar incidence of colon cancer and stomach cancer. So what are the various disadvantages of migrant studies? There is lack of random assignment to the groups under observation, because here the migration studies are done in group of people who are closeted in one area, and they are not assigned by any statistical method. Migrants may be self-selected in that fit, vigorous, and temperamentally unstable and more likely to migrate. So migrants may select themselves for the study of disease in a particular area to an investigator, and in that process happens that more fit or those who are not mentally sane, they are more likely to migrate or come out of the study. The environmental factors may only act at a certain critical point or at a certain specific age. So the environmental factors may act at a particular point in the sense that the factors responsible for the causation of disease may act at a particular age of the person. If the incubation period is long, they may suppose if the incubation period is 10 years or 15 years or 20 years, the migrants to a country, to a new country, may not show any increased incidence or mortality from the disease for many years. So this is how the migrant studies also help in understanding about the geographical causation or spread of disease or pattern of disease. Now, person distribution. We have already studied time and place distribution of disease. Now we are going to study person distribution. The first factor under person distribution is age. Age is strongly related to disease than any other host factors. As we have seen that certain diseases are more frequent in certain age groups than in others. Like measles in younger age group, cancer in middle age group, and atherosclerosis in elderly age group. And if the attack rate is uniform in all age group, it implies all are susceptible and that there was no previous immunity to the particular disease. Many chronic and degenerative diseases show a progressive increase in prevalence with advancing age. There are certain diseases which show a bimodal pattern as far as that age incidence curve is concerned. Age incidence curve is nothing but age on the x-axis and the incidence on the y-axis. So it has been found in Hodgkin's disease, leukemia, and breast cancers, there are two peaks, that is bimodal. There are two peaks, that's why they are said to be bimodal. So two peaks in the occurrence of disease. So in Hodgkin's disease, as shown in this particular graph, age incidence graph, we find that the peaking of this disease is in the age group of 10 to 15 years and also between 50 and also at 55 to 60 years. There is again peaking of this disease. So we find two peaks in this particular disease of Hodgkin's. Now, this can be either because of non-homogeneity of the population. We may have two population groups, or it is also because of certain other factors other than the factors which may be responsible for the causation of disease in different time periods, which is responsible for the bimodal pattern of the disease. Though the clinical signs and symptoms of the disease caused by these factors may be alike. Now, sex. Sex is often studied in relation to the disease using indices such as sex ratio, sex-specific morbidity, and mortality rates. Variations in disease frequency between sexes have been ascribed to basic biological differences between the sexes, including sex-linked genetic heritage, Inheritance, cultural behavioral differences between the sexes due to different roles in social settings. So if we find that usually hypertension, obesity, and diabetes to be more common in females than in set of males, and smoking, lung cancer specifically, is found to be more in males than that of females. And cultural behavior differences like going outside or smoking or alcoholism or any other behavioral differences can also be responsible for the causation of disease. Ethnicity. It is like differences in disease occurrence have been noted between different population subgroups of different racial and ethnic origin. For example, there can be disease occurrence in different subgroups or different races of the population. The diseases that can be considered under ethnicity are tuberculosis, essential hypertension, coronary heart disease, cancer, and sickle cell anemia. So these differences can be either be related to genetic or environmental factors, which have been a stimulus for further studies. Marital status. Mortality rates are always lower for married males and females than for the unmarried of the same age and sex. Married people are found to be more sober and more protected compared to that of unmarried people. And sometimes the marital status can be a risk factor from certain diseases and conditions like carcinoma cervix. This has been proved and seen that in nuns, carcinoma cervix is not there compared to that of married people, and also in cases where there is promiscuity and increased sexual contact or multiple sexual contact. So sexual contact helps in understanding about the multiple sexual contact helps in understanding about the viral etiology responsible for CA cervix. Occupation may also alter the habit pattern of employees. Certain occupations are responsible for certain types of diseases. Persons working in particular occupations are exposed to particular types of risks. For example, people working in mines or people working in coal industries they suffer a type of pneumoconiosis, and that is again coal workers pneumoconiosis. Likewise, working in different asbestos industries, they suffer from asbestosis, and those with farmers are involved with farmers' lung, like that. Social class. Individuals in the upper social class have a longer life expectancy and better health and nutritional status compared to that of lower social classes. Social class differences have been observed in mental illness and utilization of medical and healthcare services. So, certain diseases are more prevalent in the upper social class, like coronary heart disease, hypertension, and other diseases which have been found. And those concerned with lower social classes like tuberculosis, which is concerned with many other factors, are found in lower social classes. Social classes responsible for the causation of disease may be different in different countries because of the different ranges of income and because of different socioeconomic status classifications. Human behavior is increasingly looked at as risk factors in coronary heart disease, cancer, obesity, and accidents. Stress has been shown to affect a number of variables related to patient response, that is, susceptibility to disease. If you have increased stress, the susceptibility to disease is decreased. As a result, there is every chance of disease occurring in people. So, exacerbation of symptoms. Symptoms may aggravate, as in case of asthma, if there is a stress, and stress complies with the medical regimen. If there is increased stress, there is less chance that the compliance with the medical regimen is not maintained, or there is a failure in the compliance with medical regimen. Migration. In India, diseases like leprosy, filariae, and malaria are considered to be rural problems, as I said earlier. But due to the movement of these people from rural to urban areas for occupation, for employment, these diseases that are confined to the rural areas have also created a serious problems in urban areas also. Now, this human movement or migration, as we understand, can be short-term, long-term, or permanent. It can be according to age, sex, education, occupation. It can be internal within the country, or it can be to another country like external, or it can be urban versus rural. Migration has presented a challenge to control and prevention of disease. The other important factor in the descriptive epidemiology is measurement of disease. So it is imperative to understand that we should know what is the amount of disease load or the amount of disease that is present in a particular area or in a community or in a region. So this can be understood by various indicators of health, like indicators of morbidity and mortality. Indicators of morbidity, mainly incidence of prevalence, are often used by epidemiologists to measure the disease in a particular area or in a community. Descriptive epidemiology may use a cross-sectional or a longitudinal design to obtain estimates of magnitude of health and disease problems in human populations. For this, they use either cross-sectional studies or longitudinal studies. Now, cross-sectional studies is based upon a examination, a one-point examination or a single examination of the cross-section of a population of people at one point in time, the results of which can be projected on the whole population provided the sampling can be done correctly. So, it is done at one point of time to the population. They are also known as prevalence study because cross-sectional studies yield prevalence of the disease in a particular disease or a health condition in a particular area. These studies are more useful for chronic than short-lived diseases, and they tell us about the distribution of disease in population rather than its etiology. The time sequence, which is essential to the concept of causativity, cannot be detected from a cross-sectional study. Longitudinal study, it is based on observations which are repeated in the same population over a prolonged period of time. Note, the prolonged period of time is important when you compare with that of a cross-sectional study. And these longitudinal studies are often done by means of follow-up examinations. You do the study today and you conduct the study again after some days and you follow up the person concerned in a longitudinal study. So cross-sectional studies have been likened to that of a photograph and longitudinal studies to that of a cinematic film or a silent film. Longitudinal studies are useful to study the natural history of disease. So you study about the agent, host, and environment. What is the pre-pathogenesis phase? What is the pathogenesis phase of disease? It is important for identifying risk factors of disease. What is responsible for the causation of disease, the risk factors, and also to find out about incidence rates. That is, there are new cases that are occurring in the study duration. Comparing with known indices is another step of descriptive epidemiology. Now, the essence of epidemiology is to make comparison and ask questions. By making comparison with different populations or subgroups of the same population, it helps us to understand about the disease etiology. We can also identify or define groups which are at increased risk for certain diseases. So by comparing with different subgroups of the same population, we can always arrive and say that this particular disease is responsible, or this particular cause is responsible for the disease in different subgroups of the population. Now, descriptive studies help in the formulation of a hypothesis. So this is the last step as far as the descriptive study is concerned. Now, as I said earlier, a hypothesis is a supposition or an assumption or a belief without adequate proof, which is derived from observation or reflection. So you observe an event occurring in a particular area and you try to form a statement about the causation and the outcome of a particular event in a particular area or in a particular population within a particular time period and place. So this hypothesis, either it can be accepted or rejected using the techniques of analytical epidemiology, primarily, that is case control studies or cohort studies. So for a formulation of hypothesis, descriptive study is essential. For acceptance or rejection of a hypothesis, we require a case control study or a cohort study. Now, an epidemiological hypothesis should specify the following. That is the population, the cause, the specific cause, the expected outcome, the dose-response relationship, the time-response relationship. Now, what is the population? The population to which the disease agent occurs. That is the characteristics of the population to whom the hypothesis applies. What are the characteristics of the population? It can be age, sex, it can be occupation, it can be the various other characteristics of the population that is responsible to whom the disease agent applies. The specific cause, it can be a risk factor, it can be an infectious agent, so that which is responsible for the causation of the disease. The expected outcome, that is a disease because of the specific cause. The dose response relationship, how much amount of the dose is required, how much amount of the disease agent is required, how much amount of the risk factor is required to cause a disease or stated incidence of the effect. How much of time is required, the time response relationship, what is the duration that is required for the causation of the disease. So the time period that will elapse between the exposure to the cause and the observation of the effect. A hypothesis should be formulated in a manner that it can be tested, taking into consideration the above elements which I have discussed earlier. Now, if you say cigarette smoking causes lung cancers, it is an incomplete hypothesis. Whereas if you say the smoking of 30 to 40 cigarettes per day causes lung cancer in 10% of smokers after 20 years of exposure, it is a complete hypothesis because it has with it, that is the cause, that is the smoking, specific cause. Dose response, 30 to 40 cigarettes per day. Outcome, specific outcome, that is a lung cancer. The specific population, that is smokers. And what is the time response, 20 years of exposure. So you have the 5 elements of a hypothesis, that is the cause, outcome, population, dose response or time response, which is very well illustrated in this hypothesis. So whenever you do a descriptive epidemiology, you have to formulate a hypothesis taking into consideration the 5 elements, that is cause, population, outcome, dose response, and time response relationship. What are the uses of descriptive epidemiology? The descriptive epidemiology provides data regarding the magnitude of the disease, load, and the types of disease problems in terms of morbidity and mortality rates and ratios. So we have understand by this magnitude, that is again, which is very well understood by indicators of morbidity and mortality. It provides clue to disease etiology. So what is the agent that is responsible for the causation of disease is provided by descriptive epidemiology, and it also helps in the formation of etiological hypothesis. So the statement that which reflects the cause, the effect, the population, the time response, the disease, the dose response are all indicated in this etiological hypothesis, which is provided by descriptive epidemiology. It provides background data for planning, organizing, and evaluating preventive and curative services. Whether an immunization is required, whether a treatment is required, what can be done to a particular area, and which area requires those services. All this is provided by descriptive epidemiology so that we can plan, organize, and also evaluate when we implement any particular program. They contribute to research by describing variations in disease occurrence by time, place, and person. They help in understanding about how a particular disease can occur by a particular time, in a particular place, and in a particular person, and changing the environment, whether there is any change in the occurrence of the disease or time, place, and person. Thank you very much. I hope you have understood the concept of descriptive epidemiology. For a brief recap, you should understand the various steps of epidemiology. The first step of epidemiology is defining the population to be studied. The second step of descriptive epidemiology is describing the population to be studied, defining the population to be studied. The third step of descriptive epidemiology is describing the disease by time, place, and person. The fourth step of descriptive epidemiology is measurement of disease. The fifth step of descriptive epidemiology is formulation of a etiological hypothesis. So ultimately, in descriptive epidemiology, you formulate a hypothesis stating all the 5 factors which I mentioned you earlier, in, in a hypothesis. Thank you very much. Thank you for your patience.